Welcome to our deep dive into the fascinating world of relating and communicating.
Oh, relating and communicating. That's a big one.
It is, and we're going to be drawing on some great insights from Alda's book, If I Understood You, Would I Have This Look on My Face?
I love that title.
Right. It really grabs you, and it gets right to the heart of what we'll be talking about, which is basically how can we all get better at connecting with each other?
Because let's face it,
Yeah.
we could all use a little help in that department, right?
Absolutely. Especially in today's world where it seems like we're more connected than ever.
But also more disconnected in some ways.
Exactly.
I think Alda really nails it in his book when he starts with this story.
Oh, yeah, the dentist story.
Right, the dentist.
It's so relatable.
It is like, who hasn't been in that situation where someone's using all this jargon and you're just sitting there like, what?
Exactly. And Alda, he's in the dentist's chair, and the dentist is about to do something, and he uses the word tethering.
Tether.
Yeah, and Alda's like, what in the world is tethering?
I'd be like,
Right. Totally lost.
What are you going to do to me?
And the thing is, the dentist doesn't even bother to explain.
that's the worst.
Right. He just assumes Alda understands, and Alda's sitting there feeling like, hello, I'm a person here, not just a set of teeth.
Like he's invisible.
Exactly.
It's another task on the dentist's to-do list.
And that experience, it really sparked something in Alda because it made him start thinking about all the ways we fail to connect with each other, even when we're trying to.
And that takes him on this fascinating journey from hosting Scientific American Frontiers.
Wait, Scientific American Frontiers, that's a pretty big leap from the dentist's chair.
It is, but you see, his first science interview, it was a total disaster.
Oh no, what happened?
He went in thinking he knew more than he did, touched a sensitive piece of equipment.
Oh, that's never good.
Not good at all. And he realized later that he hadn't been truly present during the interview. He wasn't really listening to the scientist with his full attention.
So he had this epiphany, like, okay, I need to learn how to communicate better.
Yeah, and that's where improv comes in.
Improv, like comedy improv.
Well, yeah, but it's more than just being funny. It's about really connecting with your scene partner, being present in the moment, responding authentically.
Okay, but how does that translate to real life communication?
Alda discovered the work of Viola Spolin. She developed these improv techniques that are all about genuine relating, like really seeing and hearing the other person.
So it's not about telling jokes.
Not necessarily.
It's more about...
It's about building that connection, that sense of shared experience.
I'm intrigued. Can you give us an example of one of these improv games?
Sure, there's this one called Building Sculptures from Space. Imagine a group of people creating a sculpture out of thin air.
Out of thin air.
Yeah, no leader, no blueprint. They just have to work together, observing each other's movements to build something that only exists in their collective imagination.
Wow, that sounds...
Intense.
Yeah, a little bit.
It is, you have to be incredibly present and attuned to the other people.
And there's no room for distraction, right?
Nope, you're completely focused on the moment, on the connection with your partners.
It makes me wonder if that's part of what's missing in so much of our communication today.
Yeah, presence, that focus.
Exactly. We're so distracted by our phones, our to-do lists, all the noise in our heads.
It's like we've forgotten how to simply be with each other, you know?
I see what you mean. And I'm curious, are there other improv games that kind of illustrate this idea of relating?
Oh, absolutely. There's gibberish, for example.
Gibberish.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where you try to sell a product using only nonsense sounds.
That sounds like fun, but how does that teach you anything about communication?
You'd be surprised how much we communicate without even using real words. It's all about body language, tone of voice, facial expressions.
So these games, they force you to pay attention to those nonverbal cues.
Exactly, because without words, that's all you have to go on.
Okay, so we've got these improv games, and they sound interesting, but do we have any evidence that they actually work?
I mean, is there any science behind this?
Yeah, is it all just anecdotal, or is there something more to it?
Well, actually, there's some fascinating research that supports the link between these kinds of activities and improved communication. Like researchers at Stanford found that synchronous marching, much like the synchronized movements in improv games, can actually boost group cohesion and cooperation.
Really? So it's not just about feeling good, it actually affects how well we work together.
Exactly. It has a tangible impact on our interactions.
That's amazing, and it makes me think about team building exercises. Like maybe we should ditch the trust falls and start doing synchronized marching instead.
Could be worth a shot, right?
Definitely. And it makes you wonder, what else are we missing out on by not tapping into this kind of synchronized activity?
And it goes even deeper than that. Researchers at the Weizmann Institute of Science discovered that people can achieve leaderless synchrony, just like in those improv games where partners have to move together without anyone taking charge.
So we're literally wired for this kind of deep connection and collaboration.
It seems so.
But can you really apply that to everyday communication? I mean, that's the big question, right?
And that's where empathy comes into play, and we'll dive deeper into that in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've talked about improv and these games that can get us out of our heads and really connecting with each other, but I'm curious about empathy.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Where does empathy fit into all of this? Like, is it something we're born with, or can we actually learn it?
That's a great question, and it's something that Alda explores in his book. In fact, he takes us to Mass General in Boston.
Mass General.
Yeah, Massachusetts General Hospital, where he meets with Dr. Helen Rice. She's a psychiatrist who's doing some fascinating work on doctor-patient communication.
Doctor-patient communication, that's a really important area.
It is, because, how doctors communicate with their patients can have a huge impact on their care, on their well-being.
Absolutely. And I remember Alda mentioning that Dr. Ray, she actually started out pretty skeptical about empathy training.
She did. She had seen how some doctors would get so caught up in their patients' emotions that it would become overwhelming. Like they'd almost lose themselves in it.
Right. Like they'd get so emotionally drained that they wouldn't be able to help effectively.
Exactly. She even uses this term, affective quicksand.
Effective quicksand.
Yeah, it's like getting stuck in the emotional muck. And I have to admit, I could relate to that. Like sometimes when a friend is going through something really tough, I find myself getting so absorbed in their pain that I can't even think straight.
It's like you're drowning in their emotions.
Yeah, and you're no good to anyone if you're drowning, right?
Exactly. So how do you find that balance, that sweet spot where you can be empathetic without getting completely overwhelmed?
Well, Dr. Reese, she came to realize that empathy isn't just about feeling someone else's emotions intensely. It's more about recognizing and understanding those emotions without losing yourself in the process.
So it's like being a compassionate witness, but not getting swept away by the current.
That's a great way to put it. And what's really amazing is that she found that doctors can actually be trained to cultivate and regulate empathy.
So you can actually learn how to be more empathetic.
You can,
Yeah.
and it turns out that this training, it actually improves patient care dramatically.
Wow, that's incredible. And it makes me think about Matt Lerner, who Alda also interviews in his book. He's the guy who uses improv to connect with children on the autism spectrum.
Right. Matt Lerner is an amazing guy. He actually started by just mirroring the movements of this young boy named Ben, who was autistic and rarely interacted with others.
A mirroring.
Yeah, like just copying his movements, and something incredible happened.
What? What happened?
Ben, who had never acknowledged Matt before, he suddenly said his name.
Wow, that's powerful.
It was a breakthrough. And it sparked this passion in Matt to help other autistic children develop social skills and empathy through improv.
And he created that program, Spotlight, right?
He did, and it's making a real difference in the lives of these kids and their families.
It's amazing how something as simple as mirroring can lead to such profound connections.
It is, and Lerner didn't just rely on anecdotal evidence. He actually conducted a controlled study that showed significant improvement in empathy and social interaction among the children who participated in Spotlight.
So it's not just a feel-good story, there's actual data to back it up.
There is, and it all ties back to that idea of theory of mind that we talked about earlier. Remember, understanding that other people have different thoughts and feelings than our own.
Right, like that classic experiment with the Sally Ann test, where you have to figure out that Sally will look for her marble where she left it, even though you know it's been moved.
Exactly, and we use theory of mind all the time, whether we realize it or not. It's the foundation of so much of our social interaction.
It makes me think about all those times when I've totally misjudged a situation because I was so focused on my own perspective that I didn't even consider the other person's point of view.
We've all been there, but the more we can practice stepping outside of our own heads, the better we'll be at navigating those complex social interactions. And speaking of navigating complexity, there's this big communication roadblock that Alda addresses that I think we can all relate to.
Jargon.
Jargon, exactly. It's like the instant communication killer.
Oh, I know. It's like you're trying to have a conversation with someone who's speaking a completely different language.
And Alda, he has a name for this phenomenon. He calls it the curse of knowledge.
The curse of knowledge. That sounds ominous.
It is. It's basically that thing where when we know something really well, we forget what it's like not to know it.
Oh, I've totally experienced that. Like trying to explain your favorite video game to someone who's never played before. You end up using all this jargon that they just stare at you blankly.
Exactly. And the key is to meet the audience where they are, to start from their existing knowledge and build upon it. Instead of showing off how much we know, we need to focus on sharing knowledge in a way that others can actually understand and appreciate.
So, if jargon is the villain of communication, what's the superhero?
Storytelling, according to Alda.
Storytelling, that makes sense. I mean, everyone loves a good story.
We do. And Alda backs it up with some powerful examples like, remember Don Hewitt, the creator of 60
That is
Minutes?
legendary, Don Hewitt.
He was adamant that stories were the foundation of engaging content. He knew that facts alone rarely grab our attention, but a well-told story, something with a human element, that's what draws us in.
And there's actually neuroscience to support that, right?
There is. Yuri Hassen's research at Princeton shows that when someone tells a good story, the listener's brain activity actually synchronizes with the speaker's brain activity.
Wow, so we're literally on the same wavelength when we connect through storytelling.
It seems so, and stories have this amazing power to make complex information memorable. It's the difference between reading a dry textbook and listening to a captivating speaker. One washes over you, the other stays with you.
So, how do we tap into that storytelling power, especially when we're trying to explain something complicated?
Well, that's where emotion comes in, and Jim McGough's research shows that emotion actually enhances memory consolidation. We tend to remember events that are emotionally charged, whether it's our first kiss or a particularly stressful day.
That's true. Our most vivid memories are usually tied to strong emotions.
And what's fascinating is that Larry Cahill's research shows that even mild emotions can improve memory recall, and that positive emotions are even more effective than negative ones.
So, a good laugh might actually be more memorable than a moment of anger or fear. It makes you wonder if we should be incorporating more humor into our communication, especially when we're dealing with complex topics.
I think there's something to that. If we can weave emotion into our stories, even subtle positive emotions, we're more likely to make a lasting impact.
It's like we're creating an emotional anchor for the information, something that helps it stick in people's minds. But does this apply to writing as well as speaking?
Alda believes it does. In fact, he found that his improv training had a surprising impact on his writing skills.
Really? That seems counterintuitive. How can improv, which is all about spontaneity, help with writing, which is usually a much more deliberate process?
It's about applying those core principles of improv, being present, listening, responding to the written word.
So instead of just dumping information on the page, you're thinking about how the reader will experience it, what questions they might have, what emotional responses they might feel.
Exactly. George Gopin, a rhetoric professor at Duke, he talks about the importance of understanding the reader's expectations. When we write, we need to be aware of how our words will be received, how they might confuse or frustrate the reader if we're not careful.
It's like we're having a conversation with the reader, even though they're not physically present.
And the best science writers do this masterfully. Think of Steve Strogatz, who makes complex mathematical concepts accessible and even exciting. Or Freeman Dyson, who weaves personal stories and reflections into his writing, reminding us that science is ultimately a human endeavor.
So we can learn a lot from these great science communicators, but what about engaging the public directly, especially young people who might not be naturally drawn to science?
Well, Alda had this brilliant idea that stemmed from a simple question he had as a child: what's a flame?
What's a flame? That's a pretty basic question.
It is, but it led him to create the Flame Challenge, a global science communication contest judged by 11-year-olds.
11-year-olds, that's a tough audience.
They are, but the challenge pushed scientists to explain this complex concept in a way that was clear, engaging, and entertaining for young minds. They had to use humor, storytelling, and a deep understanding of their audience to succeed.
And did it work?
It was a huge success. Ben Ames, a PhD student, he won the first year with this incredibly creative and humorous video that explained the science of flames in a way that even kids could understand.
So it's possible to make science fun and accessible for everyone.
It is, and it all comes back to that idea of connecting on a personal level, of putting ourselves in the shoes of our audience and trying to understand their perspective.
And that brings us to another important element of communication that Alda highlights: personal connection.
He does, and he talks about his experience working with teaching assistants, many of whom were resistant to making personal connections with their students. They saw it as unprofessional or even inappropriate. But then one TA shared a personal story during class.
What happened?
It completely changed the dynamic, the students became more engaged, and the whole learning environment shifted from a lecture to a dialogue. It showed the power of vulnerability and authenticity in creating a space for real connection.
It reminds us that communication isn't just about transmitting information. It's about building relationships, fostering trust, and creating a shared experience. And sometimes that means letting our guard down and showing a little bit of our human side. One thing that really struck me about Alda's book is how he brings all these big ideas back to everyday life.
Right, like how do we actually put all this stuff about empathy and storytelling and connection into practice?
Exactly, because it's one thing to talk about it in theory,
Yeah.
but it's another thing entirely to actually live it.
And Alda, he makes this really interesting point that life itself is a form of improv.
Oh, I like that.
Like we're constantly faced with these unexpected situations, new information, curveballs that we have to deal with on the fly.
It's true. You never know what's going to happen next.
And just like in those improv games, there's no such thing as failure in life, only opportunities to learn and grow.
So it's all about how we respond to those curveballs.
Exactly. The key is to embrace those unexpected turns and find creative ways to move forward.
Okay, I'm with you on that, but how do we actually do that? How do we bring that improv mindset into our daily lives?
Well, for me, it starts with a shift in perspective. We have to let go of that need to control everything. That need to have a script for every interaction.
I think a lot of us struggle with that need for control.
We do, because it gives us this illusion of safety.
Yeah.
But the truth is, life is messy, unpredictable.
And there's no way to plan for everything.
Exactly. So instead of trying to control every outcome.
We need to become more comfortable with uncertainty, with the unknown.
Right, and that's where those improv skills come in.
Because when you're improvising, you have to be okay with not knowing what's going to happen next.
You have to trust yourself.
Yeah.
And trust that you'll be able to respond in the moment.
So maybe instead of getting frustrated when plans change or things don't go our way,
We can try to see it as a chance to practice those improv skills.
like a little improv exercise in the midst of real life.
Exactly. And remember, those improv skills aren't just about being funny or quick-witted. They're about being present, listening deeply, responding to the cues around us.
That's such a good point. I think a lot of us forget to really listen. Like, we're so busy thinking about what we're going to say next.
That we don't even hear what the other person is saying.
Right. Or we're only half listening. Our minds are somewhere else.
And we're all guilty of that
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
But the more we can practice that deep listening, the more we'll be able to connect with others on a meaningful level.
And it's not just about listening with our ears, right? It's about paying attention to body language, tone of voice, facial expressions.
All those nonverbal cues.
Yeah, because those can tell us so much more than words alone.
It's about seeing the whole person, not just the words coming out of their mouth.
And remembering that everyone is carrying around their own internal world, their own thoughts, feelings, experiences that shape how they communicate.
That's so important, to remember that we're all coming from different places.
Different perspectives, different realities.
And that's where empathy comes back into play, trying to understand those other perspectives, even if we don't agree with them.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face in today's world.
It is, to be able to hold space for different viewpoints.
Without feeling like our own are being threatened.
Exactly, and it's a practice, not a destination, like Alda says.
We're not going to become perfect communicators overnight.
Nope, it's about making small changes, being a little more present, a little more empathetic, a little more responsive in our interactions.
And over time, those small changes can add up to a big difference.
In how we connect with others and navigate the world around us.
Well, as we wrap up our deep dive into Alan Alda's insights, what stands out to you most? What will you take away from this exploration of relating and communicating?
One thing that really resonates with me is Alda's point about paying attention to other people's emotions. It's so easy to get caught up in our own feelings that we forget to truly see and hear the people around us. How can we practice this more consciously in our daily interactions?
That's a powerful question, and one that we can all benefit from pondering. Maybe it's about simply pausing before we speak, taking a moment to consider the other person's emotional state, or maybe it's about asking more questions, really listening to the answers, and trying to understand where they're coming from.
And remember, it's not just about understanding their words, but also the emotions behind those words. What are they really trying to communicate beyond the surface level?
It's about tuning into that deeper level of communication, the one that goes beyond logic and reasoning and taps into something more fundamental, more human.
We encourage you to explore these ideas further, to revisit Alda's book and see what insights resonate with you. And remember, the art of relating is a journey, not a destination, so keep practicing, keep connecting, and keep the conversation going.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.